I just vent for 1 second about the media on Donald Trump, because they keep complaining that, well, he's at the top of the polls, we have to cover him. Maybe he's at the top of the polls because you cover him endlessly.
Exactly. That was Bill Maher, host of Bill Maher Real Time, over the summer, already tired of the Trump talk then. Yet, as we approach the new year, everywhere you turn, let's be honest, Donald Trump continues to be the topic of conversation. You can have your opinion about his policies, but he is great at keeping himself in the conversation. No doubt about that.
Yeah, earlier today, I saw this on Twitter about how Donald Trump's media strategy works, and works very well. It's from Huffington Post reporter Michael Calderon. Trump calls for banning Muslims and gets calls from every single network, images of those appearances accompanying the tweet there.
And we want to continue our conversation on Donald Trump with constitutional scholar and Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz. Thanks so much for joining us on Newsmax Now. Always a pleasure to have you. Trump is making some pretty bold statements and without a doubt controversial ones. But before we get into his media strategy, let me ask you, is Trump's proposal even legal to ban all Muslims from coming into the United States?
Probably not. The Constitution provides that no religious test shall ever be required for holding office. It doesn't specifically talk about immigration, and the Supreme Court has upheld immigration restrictions based on nationality, but never on religion. It's interesting to go back in history, and there was a letter written by John Adams to Thomas Jefferson. Both Thomas Jefferson and John Adams hated Catholics, and they thought that Catholics would be a great danger to the United States. Adams wrote about swarms of Catholics coming to the country, and Jefferson talked about how can you have a free country. But then Adams ends his letter by saying, nevertheless, we are compelled by our system of religious tolerance to offer them asylum. And I think the same thing is true of Muslims. There are many people who in a bigoted way generalize about Muslims. That's always wrong to generalize. But you cannot constitutionally, consistent with our system of tolerance that our government pronounces, make decisions of exclusion based on religion. You just can't do it.
Alan, in the past in this country, we have closed the doors to immigrants in the past. I believe in the 1920s they did that. Yeah. Theodore Roosevelt said some, by today's standards, some pretty terrible things about immigrants as well. But isn't that kind of the point that Trump's trying to make here, is that we are living in different times and we're not properly equipped to deal with the situation?
Well, I think we learned our lesson. It was terrible what we did in the 1920s. It resulted in probably millions of Jews dying in the Holocaust. Had the immigration laws not been changed, America would have been a place of asylum for the Jews of Europe. I think the same thing is true of other oppressed people. And I think we have learned our lesson. Yes, we did detain 110,000 Japanese Americans in camps, but no Supreme Court justice would today uphold that. And so I think times have changed. We've become much more sensitive to human rights and civil liberties, and we're also more concerned about terrorism. So we may have to strike a different balance, but it can't be a balance based on generalizing about religion.
Right. Well, we talked about Trump's media strategy. You're obviously a guy who understands the power of the media. I want to play a clip from something that Rush Limbaugh said earlier today on his radio show. Let's take a listen.
This is his outrageous, bombastic opening position. It's all part of a negotiation. Trump's supporters know. They're in on the gag or in on the deal.
What do you think about this premise, Alan, that this is just part of a negotiation, Trump's opening salvo to kind of lay down the ground rules and then work it back from there?
It's very, very likely. I mean, he overstates and then he says, all right, it's just about immigration, and maybe it's just about Muslims who have high levels of risk associated with them. It could be the beginning of a negotiation, but I think in America, you don't start your negotiation with religious generalizations. That's just not part of America. George Washington wrote to the Jewish community back in the earliest days that of tolerance we will no longer speak. People who live in peace, children of Abraham, which includes, of course, Muslims, are free to live at peace in this country. Of course, anybody who turns against us has to respond under the law. But you can't generalize based on religion. Our history, our Statue of Liberty, our traditions are too powerful to allow for this kind of rhetoric, even as an opening gambit.
All right, we'll see if the voters and Trump supporters take that viewpoint as well. Time will tell when the new poll numbers come in. Always a pleasure to speak with you, Professor Alan Dershowitz, Skyping in. Great to see you.
Thank you.
And still to come here on Newsmax Now, thou shalt not judge, or should we? Just as many condemn Donald Trump's proposal to ban Muslims from entering this country, others suggest, if not a ban, perhaps a more critical watch should be put in place on Muslims who are already here. Is this just another form of profiling, and does it conflict with American and Christian beliefs, or is this the common sense approach we need to stay safe? We'll let our roundtable weigh in. And Donald Trump may dominate the headlines and certainly many of the polls, but there's one poll that ranks him near the bottom with less than 2%. Coming up on Newsmax Now, find out which presidential candidate Time magazine just declared this year's Person of the Year.